Okay. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Sarah Robinson from Oregon State. Siri, like she likes to be called, is Assistant Professor of Wood Anatomy, and it's all yours.
All right, everyone, thanks for joining. We're going to try out this digital presentation thing. It's not my first time doing this, but hopefully it'll be one of the better ones. This platform looks really awesome. So I'm going to be talking to you guys about spalting, which is pretty much all I do with my life. So I want to encourage you to ask questions as we go because there's a lot of information to cover and we're only going to scratch the surface. So if you have more in-depth questions to ask, just go ahead and what do you have to do? Unmute it? Or what's the protocol for asking questions?
Yeah, just go ahead and unmute and then they can ask their questions. I mean, okay. They can do this on their own.
Yeah. So the only questions I will ask you to hold will be anything that has to do with health and safety related to spalted wood. I will be covering that extensively in the presentation, so please hold off the, I know a guy who knows a guy who has a dog that died of spalted wood questions. We'll just save all those fun ones for later. All right, so I am a professor of wood anatomy, which is funny because I have art degrees. But my main research area, my only research area is spalting. And I work on everything from, direct inoculations in freshly felled logs all the way to the hardcore chemistry end, working with the extracted pigments. So we're going to touch probably more on the traditional methods because that tends to be what most woodworkers are interested in, but we will talk about some of the hard science towards the end. Oh, am I going to be able to move forward in this? Oh, no, I figured it out. It's fine. It's fine. Technology is fine. So the first thing is, we got to define spalting. And I always like to ask people, what do you think spalting is? So feel free to chime in. What do you think spalting is? What is spalting to you?
Weird colored streaks.
Weird colored streaks? I take that. Anyone else?
Fungus, maybe.
All right. Well, I mean, you're not wrong. Most of the time when I ask this question, although it's been getting better recently, North Americans in particular seem to really think that spalting is black lines on wood, sometimes with associated rot. That's a really, really narrow definition of spalting. Spalting is any color on wood that's caused by a fungus or multiple fungi, but it has to be internal. It can't just be on the surface. So a lot of the things you guys think of as molds tend to colonize wood, but only leave pigment just within that first, say, quarter inch of wood. And we would never classify those as spalting fungi because they don't penetrate down into the wood. It's a very specific sets of groups of fungi that actually cause spalting, and they're relatively rare. Not the zone liners, but the pigmenters for sure. So I want to break this out into the three types. So any color on wood caused by a fungus or fungi that has to be internal. There are three types. The first one is always sort of first stage. So I'm sure you've all worked with spalted wood and had it be really soft and mushy and it blows up on the lathe or it doesn't finish well or it takes a lot of finish if you're working with furniture. That's white rot. White rot, basidiomycete fungi cause that. They're eating the wood. They're removing the lignin, which is taking away the wood's structure, and it's causing the wood to get soft and punky. White rot is the precursor to zone lines. And so it can be very difficult. It does happen, but it's very rare to see zone lines without white rot because zone lines are not any one specific fungus. Many, many fungi make zone lines to protect their resources from other fungi or as a response to some type of stress or environmental change. But they're most commonly formed when fungus A meets fungus B and they're about the same strength and they're about the same speed of growth. And they decide it's just not worth it to battle it out. So they put up a wall to defend their resources from one another. And that's just a really densely packed melanin wall that other fungi and fungal pigments can't penetrate. They are, I'd say, 75% blackish brown. They range in that melanin brown-black color. But there are lots and lots of different colors. The most common after black-brown is probably yellow and orange. Greens and purples and all those also exist. Pink ones I've seen quite a bit of too. So there are lots of different colors of zone lines. You just kind of have to hunt for them and they're not quite as common as the black and brown ones. And then the final type is pigmentation. And that's very overlooked in North America, but it's the favored type of spalting in Europe because it has the most historical significance. So since about the 1400s, people, especially in Germany and Italy, and even on up into England, used especially green stained spalted wood, that blue green that's made by Elfscup, which we're going to look at here in a few minutes. They use that wood for their old intarsia and marquetry works that they go out and find it in the woods. So they have a very strong connection in Europe to the blue green wood, which they tend to prefer. So spalting preference really varies by region. In South America, where we've started doing a lot of work, people really like the really bright colors. They really like the bright pinks and the bright oranges, much more sort of in-your-face spalting colors. So it's just good to know all the different types. So, you don't just go around talking about black lines, which is what I hear a lot of people call zone lines, and then have people go, huh, what? I thought we were talking about spalting. So pictures, because some people are visual, and that's fine. White rot. So can you guys see my mouse pointer if I move it? Yeah? Okay, awesome. So this is maple, and this is the original color of the wood. I think a lot of people overlook white rot as a type of spalting alone. It can be a very striking effect if you know what you're doing. So this is all white rotted out, and this is the original wood color that's left. And you can do a lot with just white rot, especially on darker woods like walnut and cherry. You can put a white rot on there and get just a very nice color contrast. And it's also really useful if you want to use pigments on a dark wood. So if you have something like walnut and you want it to be green, it's really hard to see fungal pigments on walnut because it's so dark. But if you apply a white rot fungus first to bleach out some of the color and then put your blue-green staining fungus on, it will preferentially go usually in that white rotted area and stain it. And then you'll have a very vibrant blue-green next to your darker brown that you'll actually be able to see. Zone lines, of course, I'm sure everyone who's here is familiar with zone lines. Again, this is on a piece of curly maple, black and brown, most common. And you can see they're not, even if they appear black, they may not actually be black here. You can see the zone lines are actually brown, and they've just accumulated enough melanin in here to turn black. If you want to see the base color of your zone lines and you have wet wood, it's really easy to do. If you have your final turn piece and you're ready to dry it, you can dry it in a microwave, never longer than a minute at a time, or it'll catch fire. It does horrible things. Don't do it. But if you dry it slowly in a microwave, the quick drying will actually move water really fast, and the water will pull some of the pigment with it away from the zone line, and you'll see a color phase. And so you can actually see the true color of your zone line. So you'll see that black ones are often green or red or even yellow, and I'll have some pictures of that in a minute. And pigmentation, it comes in pretty much every color you can imagine, except blue. Blue's a relatively rare color, and I know you guys are probably thinking, well, what about blue stained wood, especially from BC and all those areas that have the mountain pine beetle. So the color blue you see in wood isn't really blue, it's actually black, but the way light refracts off wood makes it appear blue. It's a different type of spalting. It's a melanin-based, non-extracellular pigment. It's definitely spalting, but it's a different type of pigmentation, and it can range from a really nice blue to sort of a blacky gray, depending upon the wood species and the way the light's hitting it. So generally we say we can get any pigment except blue in wood. The most common pigments I've seen, the blue-green is by far the most common, which is Elfscup, which is Chlorocyborium, and that has a worldwide distribution, so you can find it just about everywhere. And then this red-pink of Cytilidium cuboideum is very, very vibrant. I don't know if any of you guys have ever looked around in the forest for spalted wood other than zone lines, but if you really start to look, in most forests you can at least find the blue-green wood. If you just go around and start kicking open really decayed logs, usually when you burst them apart, especially if you find a patch, you might be able to see some of that blue-green pigmentation on the inside. It doesn't occur usually very heavily, but it is there. This picture is actually really interesting because it's also showing water distributions and how they play into spalting. I prefer to work with wood that has been dried and then rehydrated by myself because I can control where the fungi grow then. And so this piece of wood was dry, and you can see that the pink is kind of like on a runway down it. And that's because I took a cup of water on this turned bowl and I shot it, just a straight shot down onto the wood. And so that's the splash run of the water. And then I inoculated it with the fungus, and the fungus grew where the water was because the rest of the wood was dry. And so it allowed me to have sort of a streak of of pigment just around the center. And I have some other pictures to show you in a bit if you want to do, half and half type spalting where you only spalt half of it. Water and moisture content is a really great way to control it.
Now, quick question.
Yeah.
Can you get spalting on kiln dried wood?
Oh yeah, you can spalt anything. Anything.
Okay.
That's wood. I just disclaimer there. You can spalt anything that's wood.
Gotcha. Okay.
That comment's going to come back and bite me on internet comments. So, our pictures are actually. Can I do this? Did I just minimize everyone? I don't know. Can you guys see all the text?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just so you can see all the text here, there are lots of other colors that happen in wood that are not spalting. So just for reference, spalting is not any color produced by the tree. I don't know if any of you guys, do you guys in your region, do you get box elder wood?
Yes.
Yes, so that red-pink color is not spalting. It is done by the tree as a type of response to wounding or stress, and lots of trees make that kind of color. You can see greens and browns and basswood and maple, and you can tell they're not spalting because the color fades. Spalting pigments are stable over centuries. All those old marquetries from the 1400s are still as vibrant today as they were the day they were installed. But box elder, as everyone knows, fades over time, that pink color. And most of those tree colors do as well, because they're not meant to be in light. They're internal pigments to help the tree with defense. They fill a very different role in the ecosystem than fungal pigments do. There are pigments that are made due to independent chemical and mineral interactions, like iron stain of oak, clearly not spalting, although sometimes people will bring me a piece of iron stained oak thinking that it's blue stain. They're very different deals. And then, of course, this is on here just in case anyone's not clear. Colors produced by dyes, like aniline dyes, not spalting, although I have seen people try to sell aniline dyed wood as spalted wood, which is rather unfortunate. But again, you can always tell because synthetic dyes fade as well, and spalting pigments don't. So if something is, in a gallery window or it's been in the sun, you can always, take a look and see if there's a color contrast between the top side and the bottom side. And if there's a color contrast, it's not spalting. So, I always really like to ask this question too. Why are you here? Why do you care about spalting? Why is it important to you?
I think it looks nice visually.
Mm-hmm. Everyone else is real quiet. Jeremy's the only one willing to offer up information. Thanks, Jeremy. So I get a lot of responses about, it's visually appealing, it's unique. Here in the U.S., that's a lot of it. We don't have a long history with spalting here. We didn't really use spalting until about the 1960s. And it was sort of rediscovered. In fact, when you get the spalting book, there's a really interesting, long, involved history about it that I got to research and actually interview people like Mark Lindquist and a lot of the people who popularized spalting in the 60s and 70s. But for right now, a lot of companies are really interested in it, especially for doing things like flooring and paneling, because they know they can charge more for it because people are really interested in the aesthetics of it. Woodworkers seem to just like it because it's awesome and unique. In Europe, they like it because it's got a long cultural history as well, although they are definitely moving a bit closer to enjoying zone lines as well, although it's a little bit more rare. I like spalting because I like really pretty colors. And I love woodworking, but I don't like, just plain wood. I like to see a lot of really bright colors in it. And so spalting to me is really spicing up the wood. So we know what spalting is. And we have a vague idea of why everyone's here. So the next part is, how do you spalt wood? Because I'm guessing a lot of you would like to spalt your own wood. And the good news is it's really easy to do. It's not rocket science at all. I would say that people get into more trouble spalting wood by overthinking it than by underthinking it. So we're going to, kind of go over the main components and then catch some of the pitfalls that people fall into along the way. So the first part is know your fungi. Yes, you can leave a piece of wood on the ground for a couple of years and hope for the best, certainly, because fungi are in the air and they'll land and they may or may not do something. And, that can turn out really well. It can take a year or two to get any type of results. And just so real fast, I can spalt something in about 10 minutes. So, using science and understanding the process and what's doing it can really help speed things down along that path. But if you've got the time, by all means, lay some logs out and do it, because, that's how nature does it. So the first part is know your fungi. Know which fungi interact, because if you want, especially zone lines, because I'm guessing a lot of people here are big zone line fans, if you want zone lines, you need two fungi of equal strength. You can't have one really aggressive and one passive fungus, or one really fast and one really slow, because the fast one will just kill the slow one. And then you don't have zone lines, you just have a dead fungus and a white rot. So pairing is essential. Two, with pigments. Pigments tend to not be as aggressive as white rot fungi, not across the board, but in general. And so if you put on a white rot fungus and then you put on something like Elf's Cup, Elf's Cup's just going to get the crap beat out of it and it's not going to do anything. It's a last stage colonizer. It comes on after pretty much all the rest of the nutrients are just shot out of the wood. So if you know what you're doing and you know your fungi, you can set yourself up for some success and really shave about a year off that 2-year process. So before we go into the types of fungi, we should talk a little about what a fungus is. And you have to give me just a minute because my nose is running and I need to blow it. So a fungus is a filamentous organism. That means it tends to grow in strands called hyphae. And then it reproduces either through the hyphae can just keep growing, or it can create spores, which I'm sure is a word that a lot of you guys know, but maybe don't really understand all that well. And those spores are lighter than air, so they get carried in the air, and then they land somewhere else, and they colonize and start forming a new fungus. Is anyone here a fungus nerd? Do you guys know what this one is? No? Everyone's like, just no. So this is probably a penicillium here, which, penicillin, which I'm guessing everyone's at least moderately familiar with. And this is just air caught. I left a Petri plate out and it landed and grew this beautiful specimen here. Its spores are adorable. I think fungi are really cute. So to put this into perspective, and I'm going to minimize this here again for a minute so you can see on the left, this is a piece of my hair, just one piece of my hair. And these are fungal spores, huge load of fungal spores. And here at 1,000 times magnification, this is one piece of my hair and fungal spores. So they are really, really small. That back. So just in terms of, a lot of things, when people talk about fungal spores and being concerned about spalted wood, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this too. But just from these pictures, sort of keeping in mind, so this was, 10 minutes of an open Petri plate, and then allowing it to grow for a day on a piece of my hair. The fungal spores are in the air all the time, and they're at a much higher load if you walk into the forest, especially in the autumn when a lot of the fungi are fruiting and releasing spores. So, the idea that you're somehow getting some unknown load of fungal spores when you work with spalted wood that you aren't getting in the natural environment is always really confusing to me. So, easy to find spalting fungi. We're going to go through some of, I think the 3 or 4 most common and easiest to find. The first one is turkey tail, Trametes versicolor, and it's got a worldwide distribution. It's a fan-shaped fungus, and it tends to have a blue inside. It doesn't always, but it's easier to identify if you find the fresher blue stuff. It's pretty thin. You can rip it off the wood. It's a white rotter, and it's a great white rotter. It's very aggressive. So if you've got a piece of walnut or something that you really want bleached out, turkey tail is fantastic for that. It's also really aggressive with other fungi. So if we look at here, Polyporus brumalis is winter polypore, and it and Trametes versicolor are just perfectly paired to make zone lines. So they grow at about the same rate. They're equally aggressive, and these two together just make amazing zone lines. Depending upon which fungi you use, you can control the thickness of your zone line, the shade of it. That's all different things you can tweak. These two together make a pretty medium black zone line that most woodworkers seem to be pretty okay with. Polyporus brumalis you can identify out in the field. It's a brown mushroom, but it's got pores on the underside. See these little circles? The pores instead of gills. A lot of brown cap mushrooms have gills. So that's a really good way to identify it. So if you are, I don't know, someone who, tends to forget about things, those two are really aggressive. So you really have to pay attention to how long they have been inoculated into the wood. But if you're just more of a, sort of a lackadaisical spalter, dead man's finger is probably for you. So this is, they're about the size of my finger. And they tend to grow, at least in North America, in the hollows underneath stumps. So you have to kind of get a stick and dig around a little bit. Use a stick, not your finger, because that just ends up with bites from things you don't want. In the spring, it's kind of blue. In the autumn, it turns to more of a black. And if I've knocked the tops off this one, so you can see if you pop it open, it's white on the inside, usually with a black rim. And it does zone lines on its own, which is relatively rare. It's a poor adaptive strategy. If you think about it, so this fungus mutates really quickly. And it changes so quickly that, if it's in a plate, by the time it reaches around to its original colony, it doesn't recognize it from the base. So it puts up a line to defend itself from itself, which is, again, a terrible use of resources, but it keeps thriving anyway. But it makes zone lines on its own. But because it's constantly attacking itself, it's very slow growing. It does do a type of rot, but it's not a very strong rot. So it really takes its time in wood, and it can give you amazing zone lines. They tend to be very fat. This is a fat black zone liner. So if you like something that looks more like someone took a piece of charcoal and rubbed it and did lines with it, this is a really nice fungus for that. But in terms of time, you have to double the time, if not triple it, with this fungus over Trametes and Polyporus. For the pigments, first of all, disclaimer, this is wildly enlarged. These things are like maybe this big if you see them in the wild. So this is Elf's Cup, Chloroseboria, and this is the fruiting form of the fungus that makes the blue-green pigment in wood, the one that's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years in artwork. Most of the pigment fungi don't make fruiting forms. So unfortunately, if you want to work with them, you're going to have to buy a pure culture because it can be very dangerous for you to go into wood and try and pull out pigments because you have no way of sequencing them and knowing what they are. And especially in the red spectrum, there are some kind of nasty fungi that are not great for you to be futzing around with. But luckily for you, sorry, excuse me. Only one genus makes this blue-green color. And we only have 2 of the species in that genus here in North America, and they're both great. So you can make cultures directly from the blue-green wood, although success with that, if you don't know what you're doing, is relatively low. If you can find a log with the actual fruiting forms on it, you can usually get a pretty decent culture out of it. The fruits usually come out right after a rain. So you won't find them when it's real hot. And they also don't like it when it's hot. So they usually prefer autumn. Sometimes we find them in the spring, but autumn is usually a better time to find the fruits. So like literally right after, if you got actually in the rain when you know it's going to stop and then get it right when the drizzle is starting to ebb, you can find these. And they're beautiful, but they're tiny. So until you get used to spotting them, you probably will miss them. But once you start seeing them, you're going to see it everywhere. Like you will never walk past another piece of blue-green wood and you'll wonder, how did I miss this? Like for my whole life. And so all of those have a pretty decent worldwide distribution, so you should be able to find them everywhere. So now we know our fungi. Now we have to know our wood, because yes, all wood can spalt, but it's definitely true that some wood spalts faster, and some wood does better with zone lines, and some wood does better with pigmentation. And some wood just takes a really long time. So if you want to get really good results quickly, we should talk about different wood species. So the first thing to know is this, hardwood versus softwood. There's a really big difference, and I'm not talking about this wood is actually hard versus this wood is soft. This is an epic conversation I got into once in Canada with a lumberyard owner when I wanted to buy hard maple. And he was like, well, we have maple. And I was like, yeah, but I want hard maple, sugar maple. Do you have that? And he was like, well, all our maple is hard. And I was like, I want sugar maple. Like, do you just have a species group? Can I come down there and ID sugar maple out from like red maple and silver maple? And he was just like, lady, listen. And he like dunked the wood on the ground. And I heard the tapping. He was like, lady, listen, all our maple is hard. Like, what do you want to use it for? And I was like, God damn it. I have a PhD in wood science. I just want to know if you have sugar maple. It sounds like you don't. So we're going to move on. So hardwood or softwood means deciduous versus conifer, not this wood sounds hard, so it's a hardwood. With this distinction made, I would really advise you stay away from trying to spalt conifers right now. They tend to get brown rot instead of white rot, which is a very destructive brown cubic rot, which I have a picture of, which I'm sure you've seen in the forest. There's no stabilizing this. It's done. It's allergy season. You'll have to forgive me. So this is brown rot, and it tends to carry in all conifers. So there's nothing more disappointing, disheartening, and I speak from experience of you've been working on a spalting bin for a year, and you've got some really good color combos going, and it's looking awesome. And you get a neat piece of wood, and you don't check to see if it's a hardwood or a softwood, and you toss it in the bin, and it turns out it's softwood, and it releases a brown rot, and everything's gone in 2 weeks. That's it. You've got brown cubic rot, and a year of your life is gone. So stay away from the conifers until you actually know what you're doing. This is a very general thing about what we know about wood and fungus, because there's no one answer to spalting, because it's a biological system and half of what you're doing is alive. So when people say, well, how long does spalting take? Or, what wood should I use, or what fungus should I use? There's so many other questions to ask. What do you want to see happen? How much time do you have? How much control can you have over your system? Because those are all factors. We know that certain fungi prefer certain wood species. We know this. We know that pale, soft, notice there's a space between soft and wood, pale, soft, space, woods, like aspen, basswood, poplar. They do really well with pigments. They don't do well with zone lines. And that's just because they don't really have any inherent decay resistance. And so white rotting fungi aren't going to waste their time putting up zone lines, because it's just like a buffet. So they just go in and eat it, and then they move on. And so the pigmenters tend to be much slower growing. They tend to be soft rots instead of decay fungi straight up. So they aren't quite as destructive, and the pale woods show pigment a lot better. So you can zone line them, but it takes a lot of care. It's much better to use pigments on those pale woods. The denser, darker woods, any of the fruit woods, like apple and cherry, beech, they take zone lines and bleaching really well. And it's not that they don't take pigment, it's that you can't see it because they're dark. So if you want to pigment them, you need to use a white rot fungus first. I have used the red pigment, which is Cytilidium cuboideum, on pin cherry, because it's kind of a yellowy red, and I wanted it to be more of a red. And so I inoculated it with Cytilidium cuboideum and let it grow, and then it looked like black cherry. I mean, no one knew it was spalted. It just looked like black cherry, but hey, then I had a really pretty redwood instead. The medium density pale woods, sugar maple and Norway maple, are amazing for pretty much across the board. The other maples are great too, but really our best maples, the best woods to spalt that we've come across thus far, if you want to be able to do pretty much anything, is going to be a hard maple. The sugar content just seems to be at the right balance there. We've got some papers that I did looking at sugar content in woods and how that affects spalting. They're science papers, so if you don't mind falling asleep, there's a lot of good information in there. And then woods that turn punky quickly, like birch, are best for pigments. You can get zone lines on them, but you've got like literally about a 2-day window between when it's spalted and when it's mush. And so if you forget about things, or you're not routinely checking your spalting, it's just going to go, because birch is meant to, go up in the forest, come down and decay quickly, and then be done. And that's exactly what it does with spalting. So you really have to watch it if you want it to work, but the pigments aren't quite so destructive. So now I just have some pictures to kind of show you what I'm talking about. This is the piece of basswood. And if you guys remember, we talked about host response. This is a line formed by the tree. And so is this. And then here's a blue stain that's trapped in it. So likely this tree was stressed, and the blue stain got in through whatever vector, beetle or damage, or just native. And the tree created these host response lines to trap the blue stain. So you can see there's blue here, but there's not blue over here. And so that's one of the reasons that the host response exists. So just to give you a visual too, these were bright green when I felled the tree. And so they faded to brown. So they're clearly host response. That's what is really nice for pigments. I really like it. It's a good wood to turn too, especially if you're new to wood turning. It, it behaves really well. So this is a piece of aspen. This was my first experience with drawing zone lines to see their color. So here you can see this zone line appeared black. The wood was still wet and I dried it in the microwave and it phased green. So they're actually green zone lines, but they're so densely packed that you can't see the pigment unless you manage to phase some of it out. And so ever since I discovered that, I've been drawing everything in the microwave just to see, what's lurking in it. And green and red are really common. This is a piece of birch, I believe. I think it's been a while. Just showing you yellow zone lines here. So this is done by another fungus that we have in North America called Enonotus hispidus. I think it's called shaggy bracket is its common name. And it makes beautiful yellow zone lines, absolutely beautiful. And there's also some blue stain in here and there's some pink stain here on the rim. I like to do combos. I don't like just zone lines or just pigment. I like to have a lot of stuff going on in my pieces, which if you've been to the website, I'm sure you've seen. So this is also a piece of aspen. I really like to use aspen because it shows the pigments really well. And so this one you can see you've got the pink stain, the blue stain. In some places they overlap. We don't have a reliable purple right now, so I tend to make purple by using blue stained wood and then overlaying it with pink stain. And then over here in the corner is a green zone line. This bowl was really pretty. It's when it was drying, I put a clamp on it to form it in the shape of an egg. So it mutated, it warped when it dried, and then it was colored sort of like an Easter egg. It was really cool. This is sugar maple. Just to show you, this is a very common look to sugar maple. You've got these nice thin lines, you've got the bleaching, and then you've got some blue stain in here. And then again, you've seen this. This is, I'm almost certain, is birch with the red stain and the water. And this is birch as well. I have this picture in here because you guys are familiar with birch trees, I'm guessing. They often have those sort of like horseshoe-shaped conchs on them when they're dead and dead standing. So that's a really, really destructive fungus. I would not ever recommend it for your spalting bins, but if you can catch a birch tree in the relatively early stages of having those on it, the wood all looks like this on the inside. It's another one that makes zone lines with itself, but it's super aggressive and it just destroys the wood. But the result can be really pretty, but you can see like there was no repairing some of this grain tear out. That's because this is a found piece instead of one I did. Excuse me, my throat is dry. Water break.
So let me ask a question about poplar. I've seen green, I've seen purple. Is that spalting?
Mm-mm.
I didn't think so.
Poplar can come in a lot of different colors. You can probably see it sold under rainbow poplar. Mm-hmm. Poplar is almost, the heartwood is almost always green. It will fade to brown over time. So that's that's how you know it's poplar generally, is that it's green.
Sure.
Especially tulip poplar. And then poplar does sort of a weird, like it can get pinks and blues and yellows in it, and no one's ever really studied it, what's going on in there. I suspect just because I've seen it a lot in fresh cut wood that it is definitely a host response. If anyone out there in the spalting world would send me a sample, I would stick it under a UV light, and then I could tell you for certain, because if it faded, that would pretty much tell us right off the bat. I think it's probably a mixture. I'm guessing that the blue stain is actually a fungus and that the tree is responding to the blue stain. So I'm guessing that it's a combination of spalting and host response. interplaying. It's gorgeous. I
It
love
is.
rainbow poplar.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of a weird blend. It's sort of like ambrosia maple, which is spalting, but the fungus is vectored in by the beetle, and there's also host response. So the tree is sectioning off the area that's been colonized by the fungus that was brought in by the beetle. So it's like all three just kind of wrapped up in one hot mess. Okay, so we know about fungi and we know about trees. So now we're going to go over, we call it the old process because we don't usually spalt like this anymore, but I know a lot of home woodworkers do. So we're going to just cover it real fast. So this is the method that I started using back when I started my master's. And it's probably a bit of a step up from what you guys are doing right now. So the first thing you can do to really help things a lot is to inoculate your wood with fungi that you know make the spalting you want. And you can do that by going out and collecting mushrooms and other fungi in the woods, but you don't know if they've released all their spores yet. You're probably not mushroomers. You probably aren't really good at ID. Some fungi are poisonous. So it's really not a good idea to just wander around the forest and start picking things. Instead, we recommend that you either go out with someone who knows what they're doing, or pick something like Dead Man's Finger, which can't be misidentified, or like Elf Cup. Like there's only one Elf Cup. Well, technically there's two, but they do the same thing, so it doesn't matter. You culture them, or you buy a pure culture from any number of culture banks. We have them too at Oregon State that we sell. And then copy the culture, because once you have one culture, you have the culture forever. You just keep putting it onto fresh food, and it never dies unless you do something horribly, horribly wrong. So the easiest thing to do is to make the media. So just like the fungus food, we use agar, but for ease of use, you can buy gelatin, just like powdered gelatin at any bulk food store. And you buy a barley malt, and you mix them in a 2% solution. And there's pamphlets on my website you can download that have everything written out. And you literally just make Jell-O and can it. And someone in your family somewhere is canned, so they can show you how to do that if you don't know what you're doing. And then you have these jars of fungus food. And yes, it's gelatin, so it liquefies at room temperature. That's fine. It's fine. The fungi don't care. Well, they do care, but you want them to be pissed off, so that works out fine. So then, if you have a fruiting body, you can open it up and take a piece from the inside and stick it in the gelatin. You can try and take samples from spalted wood, but there is literally no way of knowing if what you are pulling out is what did that spalting. If it's something you don't want, that's maybe 10% success out of that, maybe, but people often want to do it. So, it's not going to hurt anything. Don't eat the gelatin, but it should be okay. And then the easiest thing to do is to buy a pure culture and then transfer the pure culture into the gelatin itself. And that's, as long as you know what you're doing and you don't have people moving the air all over to drop fungal spores in, is a really clean way to get a culture from a plate into your jar. And it only takes a tiny scraping to put it into a new jar, and then you let that grow up, and then the jar is covered, and then you can scrape it onto, 50 more. So 1 makes 50, 50 makes, 50 by 50, and you have fungus forever. A lot of wood turning and woodworking clubs recently have been in addition to their DVD libraries, have started making fungal libraries for their members, which is an awesome idea. As long as someone there knows that you have to transfer the culture once a year, or they'll eat all the food. Don't starve your fungi to death. It's not nice. So once you have a colonized culture, you can inoculate in any number of ways. I like to use these bins, mostly because I can control the environment a lot more, because the more control you have over the situation, the faster the spalting is going to go. So yes, you could use this in a log outside, but you don't know what else Mother Nature is dropping on the log. You can't control the humidity. You can't control the temperature. In a bin, you can control almost everything. Not sterility necessarily, but at least you can keep a lot of stuff from dropping in from the air. So whether you do blanks, you can pre-turn pieces. You can put in lumber. You can get the long bins and put in pieces of lumber. I tend to do this, where I just cut what I'm eventually going to cut into a bowl blank in there. And then you take your culture and you just smear it. It's like basting a turkey with butter. Just kind of get involved, scoop it out, just rub it, smack it, and then mush it all together. And it's disgusting and it sounds gross, but it works really well. The thing to watch out for is, see these?
If you put 1 point in a culture, you should have 1 colony. If you don't, you have contaminants, which are going to probably outcompete your fungus and screw everything up. So make sure you're using a monoculture instead of something that's been horrifically contaminated. I hear someone's volume. Does someone have a question?
Yeah, actually I do. What's the small or the thinnest piece that you would recommend spalting?
Well, I mean, you could spalt anything.
Well,
I spalted veneer before. With no
that was going to be my next question. Yes. So does it take it a shorter amount of time if you were to do veneer?
Takes exactly the same amount of time no matter what the size of the piece. Fungi grow to their resources.
Gotcha.
So veneer, rather unfortunately, does take about the same amount of time as a log. So that's just a direct inoculation. And when we do wood inoculations still like that tends to be what we use. You can also, if you want to do logs, you need a cleaner way to deliver it other than just like rubbing it on the bark, because it's not going to move very quickly through the bark. So you can, on your plates, you can steam, sterilize, or boil even dowel pins in water, because they need to get wet. Fungi need water. So I usually just toss them in a pan and boil them for 30 minutes. And then take them out and let them cool. Actually, probably leave the lid on and let them cool in there while they're all sterile. And then pull them out and stick them on a plate that already has the active fungus on it. And then give it like 2 months, because it's not going to move into the pin until all the food from the media is eaten. And so once everything's dried up in the plate, you'll notice that the plugs are colored, like they'll have zone lines, so they'll be white rotted or the pink or yellow or whatever you put in. And then you've got a live plug culture. And so if you do a whole bunch of plates, you just have like these big stacks of fungal plugs. And then you can drill holes in your logs and tap them in and then put, tape or something over them. And then that's a really clean way to deliver the fungus in something like a log.
So how do you prevent contamination of the plugs?
Well, once you take them out of the plate, it doesn't matter if they get contaminated, because the fungus is already well in the plug. Okay. So it won't have any problem. So here's some of my students drilling the holes in our little test logs and then tapping the plug in. In terms of storage, so this is my old bedroom when I was in graduate school. So where we're standing is where the bed is, and to the right is my wood lathe. No, sorry, the left is my wood lathe, and then that's my spalting bins, and then there's a bathroom where there were more spalting bins. My marriage is great, by the way. It's fantastic. So this is a really good way to store it. Indoors is a better temperature than outdoors, because the spikes in the temperature really stall out your fungal growth. Anytime the temperature deviates from where the fungus can really grow, it's going to add time. So that's one of the reasons why, if we spalt in bins like this, we're looking at about 12 weeks, give or take, the fungus that we're using and the wood we're using. And that's much, much faster than if we did it outside or under non-controlled conditions, because we know we have a constant temperature. We have a constant relative humidity and a constant moisture content in the wood, because we can add or subtract water as we need to. If you have an old house with radiators, putting the bin on top of a radiator is amazing.
So how often do you check?
Maybe once a month.
Okay.
Just go in and peek, and if there's condensation on the top of the lid, there's enough moisture because it's created an ecosystem and it's raining back down. If there's no condensation on the lid, you lost too much moisture along the way. You need to add another month and put some water in, and it'll be fine. You haven't killed anything. Nothing's happened either. Some people use bags to spalt. It's not a highly recommended method because bags will release water over time. They're a really good way to dry wood really slowly. Not a great way to spalt. It does work. This one was one of my trials. It just takes a lot longer. With that said, should you ever pull a piece of spalted wood out of anywhere and it's got fruiting forms on it, you really need to not use that wood. If it's fruiting, the fungus is reproducing and trying to release spores, so that's a pretty good indication that the wood has been eaten really thoroughly if it's trying to move on. So try and stay away from things that are actually actively fruiting.
And the fruiting that's the mushrooms on it?
Yeah. And I knocked that one off, but it was actually growing out of the wood. It smelled amazing too, let me tell you. So people always ask about timeline, and I can't give you specifics because it's too specific. In general, white rot happens first, and then soft rots. Some of the pigmenting fungi are soft rots. Happens next, then zone lines, then pigmentation. In general, then there's always outliers. In terms of color, blue is the fastest blue stain, because that, I mean, I don't know if you ever worked in a log yard, but you know they work really hard to keep their wood from blue staining. If you have a fresh cut piece of wood, all those free sugars, the blue stain just go crazy. It's almost impossible to blue stain kiln dried lumber because a lot of the blue staining fungi like those early free sugars. And so you have to use very specific strains if you want blue stain and kiln dried lumber. But, you know, it's so easy to find blue stain lumber that I can't imagine anyone wanting to induce it on purpose. The pink, purple, reds tend to be very fast growing pigments in general. The greens are probably the slowest. Yellow's not slow, but you can't see it really quickly. And so it actually needs to colonize a lot longer in order for you to get a really like vibrant color change to your wood. So that's the old process. Do you guys have any questions about that? Before we talk a little bit about working with spalted wood, we're going to do our all the science in a little bit. No, everyone's good. Okay, so part 4 is working with naturally spalted wood. I added this section recently because I've had a lot of people who work with found spalted wood. And we don't work with found spalted wood in the lab or in my art practice at all because it's, it's punky and it's not reliable, and I don't like using stabilizers and plasticizers. I want to work with the actual wood. And so when we spalt wood on our own here using science, it's never punky. Which is great. So we never ever have to worry about it blowing up and trying to kill us on the lathe. But so some tips if you are going to work with naturally spalted wood. So this is kind of for wood turners specifically. It's if you're working with it in lumber form, my general recommendation is please just don't use it for anything that's load bearing. It's just not strong enough. Don't make ladders, wheelbarrows, things like that of houses out of spalted wood. It's a bad idea. If you're a wood turner, it's a really bad idea to sand on the lathe. And I know wood turners love to sand on lathes. It just doesn't work with spalted wood because as it's spinning and you've got your sandpaper, the rotted areas sand much more quickly than the sound areas, and you end up with this horrible wavy mess. The good thing is that you can get, and I've got a picture here, those sanding things that go in the drill press. And that's really fantastic. Use the thickest foam pad you can find. So like they come with a foam pad already on them, and then get that really big, cushy, soft one and stick it on too, because then you can alternate pressure over a curved and convex surface and really put very little pressure on a rotted area and a lot more on a sound area and get actually a nice smooth surface instead. So I really like the hook and loop discs and any type of drill press type sanding. If you're working with found spalted wood, you're probably going to want to stabilize it at some point. You can do, I really like CA glue, especially the Starbond stuff, because you can get it in giant containers and it doesn't cost very much. You can use the super thin stuff to stabilize hairline cracks as they're forming. And they've got like a medium to thick viscosity for larger gaps. But I generally I take the super thin stuff. And if I've got a really punky piece of wood, I just dump it onto it and let it sit for overnight, because it gets in and it really seals up the very small cracks that you can't see without plasticizing the wood, because I do not like impregnation. You can definitely use impregnation if you want, and there are things like cactus juice and other things that are very well known wood stabilizers, and people really like them for spalted wood. But just know at that point, you're really working with a wood plastic composite more than anything else. And so its properties are much more plastic than they are wood, which is another side note in terms of health and safety. If you're concerned about spalted wood, I'd be much more concerned about turning a wood plastic composite without a mask, because plastic. Finishing spalted wood can be a little bit of a challenge. So I have to blow my nose again. So oils darken wood, as I'm sure you guys know. Woodworkers generally really like oil finishes. They don't work well on pigmented spalted wood. On some zone lined wood, they can make the zone lines pop, but they yellow the white areas. And that means that that nice color contrast that you usually have between a white wood and a black zone line is faded, because then you have a yellow wood and a black zone line, and it doesn't look as nice. On pigments, it almost completely changes their color. And so here, this is oil-based with the red, and then, see, I think this is a water-based, and this is a lacquer. And so they're all the same fungus, but it's changed how they appear. Lacquers especially actually interact with the pigments and make them fade over time, which is really weird because normally they don't fade. So just no lacquer with spalted wood. We don't know what's going on with that. We're still kind of trying to work out the chemistry of what's going on. I generally recommend water-based polyacrylics for spalted wood because they sit on the surface and they're clear and they don't interact. And they don't tend to yellow. I mean, you don't technically have to finish wood. I tend to leave most of my pieces unfinished these days because there's really no need, especially, when you're working with spalted wood. If someone is going to use it for an actual functional object, they probably should know better because, spalted wood is like a cereal bowl. It's not very stable. The first time a spoon hit it, probably split apart. So there's not really, if you're making something decorative, there's no need to put a finish on it.
Let me ask a quick question. Is wax okay over spalting?
It's really hard to get wax to adhere to punky areas. It looks great on the sound areas. And I used to be a big fan of the Beal buff system until I realized that woodworkers weren't working with the type of spalted wood that I work with, because my stuff isn't punky, so wax works really well. But if it's punky, that wax just does not work. And it adheres to some areas and not others. And then you have this, like, it's shiny here and then not shiny here. Yeah. And it's just a giant pain.
All right.
But if you have pigmented wood that isn't rotted, wax works great.
Well, I'm going to spalt my wood like you do.
No punk free.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this is in here. This is for if you don't have punky wood, the Beal buff system is amazing, or any of these buff systems. And I really like that Carnauba wax on a buffing thing. But again, I haven't really pushed this one much because water bases they're across the board work really well. Although I know that woodworkers really don't like them because they tend to feel thick and they don't have that sort of traditional oil feel. But I don't know, what can I say? Spalted wood's different. So here is the moment. But I think there's only 4 of you, so that means that I traditionally have one heckler out of like 20 people. So I don't know if that means that I'm going to have maybe no hecklers in this one, which is fine. So safety in spalted wood. It's always a question I get asked. And I was really confused by it for a long time because, I studied mycology. And I think anyone who's worked with fungi is often also confused about why people are paranoid about spalted wood. With that said, certainly you should be wearing some type of respiratory protection, but that has nothing to do with spalted wood. That has to do with the fact that wood is a known human carcinogen. And any type of fine particulate that you inhale is screwing with you. So, you should be wearing a NEOSH 95 or better mask when you woodwork. Those fine particulates, the ones that you can't see, are the ones that are hurting you. And so if you're already wearing one of those, anything else that happens is it's not even an issue. My general go-to is some type of eye protection, some type of respiratory protection, and then one of these nice air filters that goes down to, something like 5 microns, 3 to 5 microns, the ones you can get that will really get the finer stuff. You guys remember that picture of how small the fungal spores were? A lot of cheap masks and a lot of filtration systems, they go to maybe 10 microns, and a fungal spore is 3 microns, 4 microns, maybe 7 microns. And so if it only goes to 10 microns, it's not actually getting anything, and it's certainly not getting the wood dust, which is very, very small. So, if you take care of yourself as a woodworker the way you should be, spalted wood is not an issue anyway. It shouldn't be an issue regardless because the fungi are in the air all the time, and I'm sure you guys have gone out into the woods at some point in your life, and every time you breathe in the woods, it's just like this giant plate of fungal spores is being shot into you, and you're all just fine. I think people tend to get confused between what a spalting fungus is and what sort of the airborne molds are. If you have a piece of wood and you've left it wet and you've put it in a bag or somewhere and it gets kind of slimy and black, and it smells bad. That's all mold crap from the air. That's not spalting fungi. And I'm certain that probably some of that could be irritating to a person. But those aren't spalting fungi. That's because you left wet wood laying around, which, I mean, it comes with spalting, but it's not something that you have to be exposed to. If you have a piece of wood, take it on a bandsaw and cut that gross part off before you put it on the lathe. You can also kill the fungi really well with 91% isopropyl alcohol or 70% ethanol. Just spray it on and they die. Fungi need water to survive, so if you dry the wood, that's pretty much it for them too. It's really hard to kill fungal spores, so I mean, you're probably not going to be able to manage that, but at the same time, they're in the air all the time, so it's not like you're getting anything new. Visuals are helpful for this. This is a monoculture of spalting fungi. This is Elf's Cup. That's a blue-green one. There's 3 lovely colonies. Well, technically there's 4 because this one hopped. You know exactly what it is. There's nothing else growing in the plate. If you bought a fungal culture from Oregon State, this is what you would get. This beautiful known thing. This is what's growing on my rabbit. And you can actually see the spore load in here and how just incredibly fuzzy it looks. Again, comparison. And this is what's in the air in downtown Toronto. So, in terms of things to be concerned about, and there's like 7 different things in here. And this, again, was just sat out on my balcony for 20 minutes. Captured, that's the stuff that fell into it. So, you know, it is true that some fungi can hurt you. They tend to be the fungi that grow on poop. Like, you know, any type of poop fungi, especially like bat poop, can have very, very bad fungi. So stay away from bat poop is my my safety recommendation for you. No bat poop, no poop fungi whatsoever. But spalting fungi are just not a super big deal, especially because you all know better and know to wear your respirators that have really good filters and nothing's going to get in anyway. But now let's see who has follow-up questions on that. Who knows a guy who knows a guy? There's always someone who knows a guy who knows a guy. It's okay. Let it out. Let it out. Really? Who thought spalted wood was dangerous before this presentation? It's okay. I won't make fun of you. I promise. I get mean emails probably 2 to 3 times a week in my email inbox about people who are really upset that I'm convincing people to use fungus for spalting wood. And then I'm telling people that it's not dangerous.
We've had a few comments on the forum about it being dangerous, but it's generally not debated much.
Oh, that's awesome. Maybe the education is filtering through. You know, most of the fungi that do the zone lines, while not ones you would want to eat, are not actually, I mean, you could eat them. They would just kind of be leathery and gross. Trametes versicolor, turkey tail, is used in Chinese herbal medicine. It's an anti-cancer now. They're using it for anti-cancer drugs. We've started doing some toxicology tests, but not on spalted wood because there's just so little in there. What we're actually curious about are the pigments themselves. Because what we're doing now is a lot of pigment refining, and we'll have pictures on that in a minute. And if you suck the pigment out of the wood and then you have it in a very high concentration, the pigment is meant to hold the resource for the fungus. And so it's naturally antifungal, which would indicate that it does have some bad properties. And so we've done some initial testing with that. And it is true that if you grow zebrafish embryos in a complete solution of fungal pigments, they don't do well. But if you grew zebrafish embryos in anything pretty much other than water, they wouldn't do well. So now we're working more on concentration. Basically, don't distill the pigments out and then attempt to drink them. That would be probably not a good idea. If you have the capability of doing that, you probably know better anyway. So this is just the breakdown slide. Fungi that spalt wood are not inherently dangerous. Fungi that land on wet wood from the air, maybe, although that's kind of up in the air. Most fungi are really only dangerous to people with compromised immune systems, so people who have AIDS or asthma. Those people tend to get really irritated by fungi, and a lot of people have allergies to fungi that they may or may not know about. But I mean, I have allergies to cats, and I'm not all going around being like, kill all the cats in the world. Fungi are definitely no more dangerous than wood dust. You should get an NIOSH 95 or better mask. You can get disposable ones that are actually pretty decent from Walmart for not too much money. And then my last one is just to kind of help contain the crazy emails I get. Don't blame spalted wood for your allergies. Blame yourself for not wearing a mask or genetics, because you can be sensitized to wood dust really easily. And so some people get sensitized really quickly, and some people take a really long time, and some people never get sensitized. But it's true that, you know, you can sneeze around different types of wood dust. I mean, I'm sure you guys know someone who can't be around cedar, or someone who can't be around walnut. They should have worn a mask. You can get sensitized really easily. And this is a great picture. This is a broken baseball bat at a baseball game. And it's your reminder that some things should not be spalted. Anything that's going to take a hit, anything that is load-bearing, it's a bad idea to use spalted wood. Spalted wood is for decorative things. It is not for functional things.
So what about, that's kind of where I'm not hung up on the safety part, but that's more my concern. Is I think the spalting is really beautiful, and I'd like to use it for projects. But I don't do turning. I don't make little things. I would be like a panel and a raised panel door, maybe. Or
That's fine, yeah, because it's not actually bearing any load.
okay. What about like a small end table?
I mean, I wouldn't have anyone stand on it, but like putting cups on it, sure. I mean, I have my table and chairs are spalted. You know, a lot of my stuff that's furniture, but isn't like sat on hardcore furniture, or it's the kind of spalting that doesn't decay. Like my table and chairs, my dining table and chairs are blue stained, which doesn't actually affect the strength of the wood. I'm more concerned about the white rot and the zone lines, because those are very aggressive decayers.
Yeah, and zone lines is something that I would like. That's what.
Yeah, they're great, but they do come with decay, so be careful.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so now science, exciting times. So we've got some newer processes that we use in the lab, which are much, much faster. So this all kind of started with this little Elf's Cup fungus. It's a beautiful blue-green color, and it makes such a gorgeous color in the wood. And we grow it. Well, actually, this is what it looks like in the rays. If you guys are wood nerds, this is the transverse plane. So the way the tree grows is up and down. And here are the rays, which run in and out of the tree, and you can see the pigment hold up in the rays there. It's gorgeous. It's just gorgeous color. And so this was sort of our problem, is that, you know, we grow it on a plate and it just didn't grow well. So that's 1 month, and this is max growth at 6 months. Most fungi that we use for spalting will cover the plate in a week in one colony. And so this was a really, really big problem, because we really wanted to use it for spalting, but this is one that in the forest takes 5 or 6 years to really colonize something, if not longer. And so working with that, we started thinking, okay, so what makes it grow in the forest? It likes to grow on super decayed wood. So we went out and we got some super decayed wood, and we chipped it up and we put it in the media with it, and the fungus just exploded. And it was so excited because there was spalted wood in there, and it was like, oh, this is amazing. It's already white rotted. And it grew really fast, which is great. Except then we had like 500 dried wood mats that were blue-green, and we weren't quite sure what to do with that either. And so finally I went and talked to a friend of mine who's a chemist, and she said, well, look, why don't you take the pigment out? And I was like, oh, what these magical words that you use? And so you can extract the pigment really easily. Well, I guess it's easy for us because we have access to chemicals. You can extract it with acetone, which is nail polish remover. It doesn't hold as much pigment as the stuff we use. We use dichloromethane. You can also use chloroform. Again, probably not things you want to be working with at home, but we can hold a lot of pigment in those. But acetone works for at home. And it's the same if you go into the woods and you find the blue-green wood. You can just shave it with a saw to get little pieces and stick it in a jar and pour acetone on it and swirl it around, and the blue color will drop right out. And it's gorgeous depending upon, you can have different blues or greens depending upon the concentration. It's absolutely fantastic. And so when fungi make these pigments, they grow into the wood really slowly, and they release the pigments outside of themselves. And then the water that's in the wood carries the pigments through the wood. And so when you do this, pretty much you're just harvesting their pigments. And when you release it into the wood, it moves the same way as it would through the wood. So you get the same, there's like no difference between a fungus doing this and you doing it, which is really awesome. So we have we have 3 pigments that we work with routinely right now. We have this beautiful sort of red color that can be red or pink, orange, purple, depending upon what wood it's on and the concentration. We've got this blue-green that can trend more green or just a shade into the blue-green spectrum, depending upon concentration. And this is highly concentrated. But we have a yellow that can be a yellow-brown and then sort of not grass green, like a yellowy green, depending upon concentration. And this has been amazing because collecting these pigments has meant that now instead of waiting the years and years it takes for these pigments to grow onto wood, we can literally just release them. And they'll go in the same places they would by the fungus doing it, except, instead of 5 years, it's 5 minutes. And they're really easy to apply, especially if you already have a piece that's got white rot and zone lines in it, because remember, the zone lines are meant to restrict other fungi and their resources. So if you have a completely encased zone line like this, you can deliver the pigment, and if you put it on slowly, here my student was excited because I was taking pictures, so it was going too fast. But if you put it on slowly, it won't run over the surface, it will absorb, and it won't hop the zone line. So the zone line contains the pigment just as it would in nature.
So when you add the pigment, it soaks into the wood, and so you get good penetration?
Well, you get perfect penetration. It depends on what solvent you're using. The issue is binding. So the pigments, they are only very tiny water soluble. And so they don't move with water, which is great, very well. But that means that you have to carry them with an organic solvent like acetone or chloroform or dichloromethane. But it also means that in order to get them out of the wood, they have to prefer what they're in to the surface. And so then if you put them on wood, they prefer being in solution over the wood, because that's how you got them out to begin with, is you found something they liked more. Well, this presents a problem because they won't bind to the wood until the solution has evaporated. And with dichloromethane, it's a very fast evaporation, but evaporation happens from surfaces. And so the dichloromethane shoots through, and evaporation happens from either surface. So yes, you have full penetration all the way through, but there's no penetration in the middle. I mean, it was there, it just didn't bind, because it can only bind where the dichloromethane has evaporated. So, it's really, this process is much more for finished pieces. Like, it's done, it's sanded, and you just want to put like a little splash of color in places. It's really, really good for that. We have other solvents that we're working with that will distribute it throughout the wood, but we can't talk about those because we're patenting them. It's very exciting. But yeah, so this is absolutely fantastic. And it's, again, if you've been to my website and you've seen the bowls that have the zone lines, and then they'll have like just a little piece of pink here and this little piece of yellow here. This is not all the time how we're doing it, because I can do it still with growing the live fungi too, but this is the faster way by far. Slipping through some pictures. You can use the pigments after you extract them. You can get a wash. You can use them sometimes to if you have it in a cup, you can pour it into the wood and roll the wood around and do like a subtle color change. I use it a lot. Someone gave me a magnolia tree. I hate the color of magnolia. I just cannot stand its color. And I think it's horrible to turn too, but I had it and it was given to me. So I felt like, I got to use this tree. And so I started taking the yellow pigment and actually just disperse dyeing the magnolia into sort of like this nice, like butter color, which was really, it was even and it was beautiful. And I just really liked it. It's really sticky. So wherever you put it, it tends to stay. So, you can draw on wood relatively easily. Here you can see though too, the zone line holding the pigment. This is white rot here, the original color of the wood. I wanted to spend a little bit of time just showing you guys pictures of stuff we find in Peru. So I have research sites in the Amazon rainforest where I go to look up new fungi to use in spalting all the time. And a lot of those, we could never distribute in the United States. They're much more for research purposes. But eventually, if we get them growing, we'll be able to extract their pigments and actually release those to people. And so this is a way to help expand the color palette of spalting without, destroying the ecosystem by moving fungi around. So these are, you see the orange in here? Peru has a very, very common orange zone line that you can see pretty much all throughout the Amazon. And it's just gorgeous, this lovely orange color. This is a cross section of the zone line here. They've got a different blue-green, which is much closer to the green spectrum. This is actually, so this is a diffusing yellow zone line. So this is it looks like black, and then because it's very hot in the Amazon, it's actually diffusing on its own. It's diffusing the yellow out from the zone line. And this is a really interesting, it's sort of like a duck yellow. We don't really have a yellow that's quite this yellow. Here's just to give you guys a picture of brown zone lines versus black zone lines. We have brown zone lines in the United States. This is a nice purple. We've been really interested in trying to find and culture purples because we just don't have them here. This last year we found a beautiful, it was like a lilac, like this color zone line. And then we found a violet zone line in the same region, and they were interspersed with each other, and they were just gorgeous. These two different shades of purple zone lines that were arcing across one another. I don't have a picture in here, but they're just fantastic. In the spalting book, we have a lot of pictures from the Amazon and a lot of microscopic pictures to actually show you what's going on in the wood. And here's the orange zone line again, and you can see it's much more concentrated here, so it's diffusing out from the line. And this is the fungus that's responsible up here.
So you talked earlier about a lot of domestic species in using spalting, and I'm assuming you can get spalting in a lot of exotic species as well.
Yeah, you can spalt anything.
Okay.
So most countries don't sell spalted wood because they don't have an inherent value for it. Like especially in South America, they have gorgeous spalting, but they prefer straight grained dark woods because they know those are merchantable throughout the world. So we've actually been working with places like Peru to show them that this wood that they just leave on the ground or that they burn for firewood is actually a very high value if they know where to market it. And so we're trying to get it more available to U.S. consumers after it's been properly, killed and fumigated and all that business. So, hopefully within the next 5 years or so, you'll actually be able to access stuff like this, which would be awesome. More green. This is like a salmony pink color we keep running across. We haven't managed to. So when we take these, we take samples back to the U.S. We have all the correct permits. And we culture them, and then we sequence the fungi to try and figure out what it was. And we keep finding new species, which is really cool because we get to discover new fungi, name things. But some of them just keep eluding us, and this one we haven't been able to sequence yet. So right now it's just the salmon pink fungus. And here's a red zone line. So if you look really closely, you can see this was our big from 2 years ago. This was our big exciting find, was this nice red zone line. And I have found red zone lines in the US before, but they're very rare. And I just wanted to show you guys that host response happens everywhere. This is an unknown wood species in Peru. It's a species that the woodworkers know because they use it because of that pink color, much akin to box elder. But the wood anatomists and the scientists don't know what it is. It's never been given a proper name, and it's never been studied. And so when I was there last year, they had just gotten some from a woodworker who had asked them what it was, and they were like, "Oh, I've never seen this before." But everything you're seeing here is by the tree. So this is all tree stuff that's going on here. So I'm going to minimize this one more time. We've hit sort of the end of the base talk. There are additional resources. There's a book. Look, it's got a pretty cover. It's available on Amazon. There's the website, which has tons of information. And then, you can just email me to chat. The book cover here, this picture of the bowl, actually has some of the blended technique of the zone lines that were induced and then the colors that were put in. And people tend to ask, how do we do this research? And in case you're curious, sorry, hold on. This work is really weird for science. They don't quite know what to do with us. We don't tend to get grants. We're actually mostly, I'd say 95% supported by woodworkers who buy the fungi and the pigments and, do the workshops and for these talks. So all of this work that's developed is because of woodworkers. Like, you guys have funded it, and So we're really happy to help disseminate the information out because we've got a lab of like 25 students right now who are working on spalting in one vein or another. And my whole career is built upon spalting, and it's all because woodworkers love it and care about it, which I think is really fantastic.
So how many researchers are there studying spalting?
In the world?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be a very popular topic.
Well, you'd be surprised.
Okay.
You know, everyone who's currently studying spalting has worked either with me or under me at some point. There's a lab in Canada that works on it. There's a place in Peru. There's a place in Chile, Germany, Ireland. There's a big place in Ireland. So there's a number of places throughout the world. I'd say there's fewer than 50 people working on spalting. But we all kind of have a network, and they kind of use me as sort of home base. And so we kind of keep track of everything and make sure people aren't doing the same stuff over and over and over again. So that, sirs, because I don't think there are any ladies here, is the end of the presentation, complete with beautiful, beautiful fast spalted bowl with zone lines and white rot and red and green and yellow. Questions?
Yeah, was this bowl done with the pigments?
This one was done with extracted pigments. Here, let me, yeah, okay, hold on. We're still on share the screen, right? You can see what I'm doing? So I can spell my own website right. Just for comparison, so here, this was my first real success with fungal pigments, and this was done over the course of about 3 years, which is how long it takes to get something like this to develop naturally. So you put the white rots on first, and then they make the zone lines, and then you have this area here, and you take a tiny piece of the blue staining fungus, and you stick it there, and you wait 6 months for it to grow, and then you dry the wood to kill the fungus, and then you get it wet again, and then you put the orange one here, and then you wait 6 months for it to grow, and then you dry the wood, and then you rehydrate it, and then you go again. So you can get the same effect by natural growth, certainly, and I did that for years, but it's just not worth it. It looks exactly the same under the microscope. It looks exactly the same in the final piece. And it's just the headache of doing this, especially I had a whole bunch of these going when I had that brown rot problem, and I cried. Like, to have like a whole bin of this type of wood just go in a couple of weeks because of brown rot introduction is just terrible. Other questions?
So before, this was an exercise in patience, and you're taking that out by extracting the pigments, right?
Yeah, the biggest complaint I've always had is, yes, we know we can select the wood and we can select the fungi, so we know what colors we're going to get, and we have a vague idea of time, but the time is just so long. People are impatient, especially industry, and they were like, we thought we were really cool getting it down to 12 weeks instead of 2 years. Like, we were really proud of that, but that's just too long for people, and so we just had to keep going at it. And now we have tanks of fungi. You keep them like bees in the lab, and they just have spigots on them. And so when we want pigment, we literally turn a spigot, and it comes out in a cup, and then we can use it. And the fungi, and it doesn't hurt the fungi because they're kept in agitation with sugar water, and they just keep producing pigment. And then we just we take a little bit. That's it.
So the carrier doesn't kill the fungus?
No, it's really hard to kill fungal spores.
Wow.
In fact, I've seen it. Sometimes we keep it in suspension to store it on occasion, and the red one is growing in the dichloromethane right now. Which, there's no sugar water. There's I don't even know what it's living off of at this point, but it's there. It's growing.
Is there any kind of control or influence over where the zone lines occur or the pattern the zone lines make?
Well, you can definitely change, what they look like, thick, thin, the double lines that you sometimes see, circular versus linear. You can control all that with fungal pairing very easily.
Okay.
If you actually want to put them down in a specific place, you can either use water to have a dry place and a wet place, and they'll grow where the wet place is. Or you can use copper sulfate in a very low concentration. And I've got a paper on it too, that was part of my PhD work. There's a certain concentration of copper sulfate that you can lay down, and it actually makes the fungus, it's weak enough that the fungus tries to sequester it within the melanin. And so it specifically attacks those areas. And so, you can like write your name or draw Mickey Mouse or something with the copper sulfate and then inoculate that area, and it will zone line exactly where you put the copper sulfate.
Oh, wow.
Other questions? Oh, small crowd.
I probably have many questions, but I'm going to have to get into this, and I am going to. This looks so interesting. I have a little room in my shop I'm going to turn into a room, I think. I can't wait to get the book. Is that going to explain some of the how to?
The book covers everything. So it starts off with, the first couple chapters are sort of a general introduction to spalting. We talk about what it is. We look at it microscopically and macroscopically, all the different types. And then there's like 5 chapters on history, how it developed in Europe, how it came over to the United States, how it became from woodworking to wood turning. And then the later chapters are all, how to do it, really specifically, like, here are different ways to do it. Here are how the fungi work. So it covers like everything you could ever possibly want to know. There's also like, I don't even know, 6-10 pages with just color plates. So if you've been to my website, you've seen there's a comparative spalting page where it's, here's all the sugar maple blocks of the same size. And this is sugar maple with the red staining fungus and sugar maple with the zone lines. So there's like 6 pages of that, of different wood species and different pigments and different zone lines and what it all looks like on different species. So instead of emailing me and saying, hey, I really want to zone line wood, how do I do it? And having me send you a very elaborate email about what color zone line, how thick, where do you want it? You can actually just look up in the book and be like, I want it to look like sugar maple with Enonotus hispidus and Xylaria polymorpha blended at this concentration.
It sounds like your book is very comprehensive.
It's very extensive. There's a lot of pictures. Other questions? All right. Everyone else missed out. I had a good time.
Wow. Well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
This has been really fascinating.
Feel free to email me if you have more questions.
Absolutely. So, well, thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll get this posted on YouTube.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you again.
Bye.